Cheers, Mama. We talk about the vineyard and the wine and the food pairing. I love the rosé, Paul. I do want to introduce Brad, who's with us this week. And the reason that we chose this food pairing and this wine are because we've got an exciting trip coming up next year. As I think I've mentioned before, it's the only thing on my calendar not tentative or canceled. So it is the bright shining moment of my calendar right now. And he's going to take us on an armchair travel tour as soon as we finish our tour of the vineyard. So since Dad is out of town on his bike trip, you get me for the vineyard tour or the vineyard update this week, and Dad gets to stay muted. Ha ha ha. Brad, in case I love it, Paul's clapping in case you missed that, Dad. For those of you like Brad who missed this before, Dad didn't know how to unmute himself and mute himself at the beginning, so I have all the control, which, as every daughter would love, I think that's fun. Okay, so of our two vines that we're following, we're going to start with our Cabernet vine. Oh, we should start with the snores under the. I'm going to take a quick detour. We're going to start with the snores under the desk. We have not one. Nugget is usually the one snoring. I took this picture literally right before we started, but Sasha came over for a play date today because she wanted to come to happy hour. So we have all the dogs in attendance. And if they start barking halfway through, now you know why. So the Cabernet, the vineyard, we're in that phase right now where we're just managing, not just managing, it's been really hot this week. And it's going to get really warm next week. So
today.
And tomorrow and the next day.
The early part of the week was nice.
So we've had this wonderful moderate summer and more reminiscent of like the 2012 vintage than anything in the last couple. And this week it's getting really warm. So the challenge then is next week. So the challenge is, as we've been talking about, how do we keep the vines healthy? How do we make sure they have enough water, but not give them too much because we want to keep those berries small. We don't want the canopy growing like crazy because we don't want the shading. We like this dappled sunlight down here that the vines get, or the grape clusters get. We like that we have nice open canopy. You can see through it in places. That means we have good airflow, we have good light penetration. But when you look up at the shoot tips, everything's healthy. And so we're keeping an eye on everything, and everything looks really great in the vineyard. So that's our Cab vine. And if you go back to the last couple of weeks and compare, the berries are growing. They're getting easier to see the clusters, which is also in this part of the season. Berries are getting bigger. You can see the clusters are much more evident than they had been in some of our previous pictures. The grape seeds are growing and the berries are getting larger, and they will continue to do that until veraison, which is, well, just before veraison. We're about a week or two away from when they will hit their final size for the season. So they're growing, but they're still small. We're gonna everything looks great for good concentration, good color in these blocks, in all of them really. So, and then while we're in the vineyard and we're talking about traveling the world, I wanted to share some contrasting photos that when last year Brad led the wonderful trip to the Mosel, I took this picture of Riesling vines in Bernkastel, and then I came home and 3 days later I took this picture of Riesling vines in De Bruyl. And I think it's one of the reasons that it's really important to go to see other wine regions and spend time in them, is that it's really impressive the difference in how the vines grow, and it really explains why the wines taste so differently. And I think one of the shocking things, especially this morning or today when we looked at this, because looking at those other pictures, we had so many blue skies, and there's blue sky in this photo from last year. And then this photo of the sky from Bernkastel was not so blue. And the other notable thing, since I was talking about how dry our climate is a lot yesterday, all these hills even where there's no vineyards, they're nice and green. And our hills, where there's no vineyards, are such a beautiful, lovely beige. And that control of irrigation and water is really unique to the Yakima Valley. But it is, I mean, there are lots of places to grow grapes all over the world. So it's fun to see all the differences and taste them in the bottle as well. So going back to the bottles, we've got our rosé, our Cab Franc rosé, because next year our tour starts in Provence. And in the theme, the very classic, because we make classic traditional wines, and classically wines that grow, wine and food that grow together, go together. And also because I needed an excuse to do something with my rhubarb plant, because it is as big as my dog. We have these lovely rhubarb, strawberry rhubarb, lavender. They were supposed to be galettes, but I couldn't find the puff pastry sheets. I got the shells. So since we're all being creative during COVID, I got my puff pastry shells with I grew the strawberry, the rhubarb, and the lavender that go into it. So it's my traditional, and Becky failed because she's having a big week. Sorry, I told you I was gonna throw you under the bus. She has rhubarb in her freezer from my plant from last year and is having too busy of a week to cook. So maybe next week we will expect to see your efforts of the rhubarb. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he got into this, I hope, and take us on a tour around the world.
Okay, I'm ready. Can everybody hear me all right now? I can't turn it up anymore, so I hope you can. I'll holler a little bit.
It helps if you lean forward, if you're a little closer to your.
I'll try to lean forward, yeah, because my microphone is right there. So anyway, my name is Brad Cilley. I'm born and raised in Washington. I grew up about a mile from Snoqualmie Falls. So always lived in the area, but I've always loved to travel ever since I was young. I hitchhiked coast to coast when I was 16 to New Hampshire to see family members. So I've always been a traveler. In '84, I started a company out of college with a couple of partners, mostly business travel, corporate stuff, really dry, really boring. And then in '91, I started doing University of Washington Husky football road trips. And I also worked with the Cougars for a couple of years, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I went down and worked with the Ducks one year and decided I was done with that. So, but the whole football thing got kind of old, as well as the baseball road trips. And 20 some years ago, I was fortunate enough to convince Cisco Morris, and I know some of you are local, some of you are not. Cisco Morris is originally from Wisconsin, but he's been out here for a long, long time, and he is kind of a gardening guru, has his own, or had his own radio and TV program, and started doing garden tours with him worldwide, and been to Australia, New Zealand, Europe too many times to count, the UK, Ireland, and I'm hopefully taking a garden and wine tour group with Cisco Morris to South Africa in December. That's if the world health situation allows. So we'll see. So I've transitioned from doing corporate travel work with 19 employees in an office to now me at home in home office doing special interest wine and garden tours. And next year's tour of well, we're starting with Bordeaux. I had a cruise scheduled with Damon Heward and Drew Bledsoe, a couple Bordeaux winemakers. That was supposed to be in May to Bordeaux, 124 guests on a cruise, on a chartered cruise ship. And as you might expect, all that was canceled, postponed. And so that will be my first wine cruise next year now. Uniworld Cruises, which is my go-to cruise line now, was able to move the entire sailing 1 year forward. So we have, or 1 year back. So now that entire group, with the exception of 18 people, weren't able to make the new dates, and I'm working on getting, reselling those cabins and getting their money back to them. So Bordeaux will be the first, and then will be the Rhone, Provence, Burgundy cruise with Carrie and Chef Terry Rotero and 2 other winemakers. And looking forward to that. So that's a nutshell of how I got in the travel business. I have really a dream job, planning 4 to 5 special tours each year and leading those. I've been asked before, do I go on every one of these tours? The answer is yes. A few times decades ago that I didn't go on a tour and I trusted somebody to make sure that things went the way I wanted them to, it didn't work out. So I go on every single tour now. Some of these things need troubleshooting, and if I'm not there to do it, it doesn't get done to my satisfaction. I'd rather deal with the problems ahead of time than deal with the calls for the next 6 months. So that's my philosophy. So any questions about what I do? I guess you have. How do we do questions? You have them all muted.
Oh, people can unmute themselves, and I feel like Adrish is about to ask if you need an intern.
Okay. So anyway, what do I have next year? Provided South Africa goes this year, and I won't have to move that to next December. We're starting with this Bordeaux cruise in May, and then the Rhone in June, and immediately after that, I have a Douro River, Portugal cruise with 2 other Washington winemakers on that trip, and then a couple garden tours to the Cotswolds, and then another garden and whiskey tour to Scotland in August, and then 2 chartered cruise ships to Croatia in September. And when I say charter cruise ship, these are 38 passenger yachts that I've chartered for 2 back-to-back weeks that people buy into along the way. So next year will be a busy year. This year I'm sitting on my hands a lot. So I don't know really what's going to happen. I heard back from a number of hotels in South Africa that I was hoping to be visiting in December, and they're still optimistic that things will open up in August and people will be allowed to come and travel. Right now it's business travel only. Tourism is not allowed at all. They're still banning wine sales of all kinds in South Africa. So we're lucky in that we're able to stay home and drink. They don't have that luxury. I have a friend who lives in Gaborone, Botswana, but she spends half her year in South Africa. And both countries have banned alcohol and tobacco sales. So that would be torture. You can imagine not being able to be home and have a glass of wine. I mean, I haven't had a cigarette in 35 years, but it would be torture not to be allowed to have access to the vices.
They keep us sane.
Yeah.
So Karen, you show the picture you have for the boat when you were there. So maybe Brad can talk about the boats themselves. Because I know a lot of people ask me, how big are they? What do they, so
Oh, the cruise ships?
Okay,
Yeah.
This was one of my favorite pictures from the Mosul tour, because on that trip there were 4 winemakers, or 4 wineries represented, which were Andrew, myself, and then we've got Matt, and we've got the mom, and Becky, who had a black eye, and it was so much fun because we had our winemaker spot on the boat, and so everybody who wanted to have fun, aka indulge in the vices, as we're calling them today, we hung out on the front of the boat. And on this morning it was beautiful, and it's totally a different experience to go down a river on the water versus in a car, and it was really cool. I had never been on a cruise before. I had fun. It's a good way to travel.
Yeah, the cruise ships range depending on the river, and the one we were on, I think, was an average. It was an older ship. Frankly, I wasn't really thrilled with that ship. It was okay, but I'm hypercritical, and when I look around and I see some things that need improvement, and I have a feeling they're going to be retiring that ship fairly soon. But the one that we're taking on, the Rhone, The Rhone River accommodates a larger ship than, say, the Douro does, or they do in Bordeaux, or even some of the Rhine ships. It's 150 passengers, and in 75 cabins, more deck space. Uniworlds, I'm not going to say anything bad about Viking River. I used to use them quite a bit until I discovered Uniworld, and once you find something better, there's no point in going back. Uniworld is an all-inclusive program where all your drinks, your meals, your accommodations, your shore tours, they do have like a top shelf wine and liquor selection that they charge more for, but everything is really included, including the gratuities at the end of the cruise. So the cruise has the basic cabins down below where you've got a small window up above, so that you know if it's day or night. You don't have a vista or anything. You do know what the weather's like, and if you're still floating. And then the next level up has a basic view window, and then you go up to other levels that have sliders and balconies, and what they call their French balcony, which you can't really spend much time out on, but you can lean out the window and see what's going on. And then plenty of public areas. And what I'm constantly telling people that insist on suites that are sold out is, you're never going to be in your cabin. Don't pay for a suite. You spend so little time there, where literally the dining room, the bar, the upper deck are just a few steps away. So it's completely different than ocean cruising. If I was in the ocean cruise business right now, I would have to worry if that industry is ever going to come back. I think people are going to be resistant to being locked up on a ship that's going to be at sea, that you may not be able to get off of if they have health issues. The great thing about the river cruises is that you're always in a port. You're in port most of the time. You're sailing very little from one small town or city to another, but you're mostly ashore, which is a great thing. And the ships are docking right in town, where you can go to a store or take a walking tour, or visit a cathedral or something. So I've been involved in river cruising now for 20 some years, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a great way to see Europe.
So what are some of your favorite travel destinations?
Well, Ireland has always been my favorite country. It's been I've been there, I don't know, 15 times. I don't know what it is about Ireland. I have some Irish blood, but according to Ancestry.com, I don't have nearly as much as I thought I did. But it's, my grandma's ashes were carried there by me some years ago. It's just a kind of a magical place. I just really enjoy it. There's not a lot of river cruising in Ireland, unfortunately. But I would never miss a chance to go to Ireland. My wife, unfortunately, isn't that keen on it because it rained most of the time we were there, but it's not like we're not used to it living here, right? So Ireland's my favorite. I love Spain and Portugal too, and I grew up from backpacking in France as a teenager, really not liking much about France, to where I'm still not a huge fan of Paris, but I love the French countryside and the French people. Never really gotten the language to work for me, but you can make do. You can always make yourself understood. So those are my favorites.
All right. So Adrish wants to know, what are your craziest cruise stories, good or bad, good and bad?
I didn't come up with any crazy cruise stories. Oh, well, I don't know. Back when I was doing football travel, there were a couple of years where we chartered an entire ocean ship for a group of Huskies. And in 1994, the Huskies were playing University of Miami for the first time ever. And Miami had a 122 game winning streak or something crazy. They call it the Whammy in Miami. And we had Don James, became kind of a client and friend of mine, and he did a lot of travel with me. But that was the first trip he did. I contracted with him. We called it the Don James Cruise. And half the ship was us, and half the ship were a lot of Brits. And they were a little more conservative than we were. And we had a tour desk there. And one morning I went to open the tour desk, and somebody had slipped a note under the door saying, "You Americans need to get a life." So I thought that's pretty much said it all. I mean, I felt bad for them because we really did dominate this. And if you weren't a football fan, certainly, and if you weren't a Washington football fan, you may not have been having a good time that week, but we all did. So I have a lot of travel stories. The problem is I never know who's listening. So for the people that might recognize the story, you'll have to wait for the book to come out. I'm working on one.
So Rhea asked if you have a favorite place in Ireland.
Anything in the West. The West is where the music is. It's where the culture really resides. And I talk to people about going to Ireland all the time. And my first suggestion is don't spend any time in Dublin. Dublin is just another large European city. Galway is great, but Doolin is a place that's up north that's known for its traditional music. Connemara is just a really haunted place. A lot of rocks, a lot of this karst limestone scenery. It's I think Cromwell, when he was over there, he said part of his quote was no tree to hang a man from, or something like that. It's a really desolate place, but it's also really something. And then down in the south, oh shoot, I can't think of the name. The Ring of Kerry and the Ring of Beara are two great places, but you have to be careful not to go there anywhere from May through September because of the tour buses. It's overrun now with travelers. So, yeah, anything in the West that has traditional music. And again, that's another thing that I would love to do in Ireland is go into a dark bar and listen to Irish music and have a pint of Guinness. That my wife, that's the absolute last thing she would want to do ever. So my next couple trips will probably be without Dingle. Oh, thank you. It was Dingle. I was trying to think of the name. Dingle's really great, but the problem is it's just, if you go in the off season, it's wonderful because things shut down. But the tourists have really kind of taken it over. And I think the Dingle dolphin still lives. It may be a generational thing. It may be the 5th Dingle dolphin they're working on. But yeah, I do enjoy Dingle. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious. I get a wine cruise because, I mean, if nothing else, you drink a bunch of wine, right? I mean, that's easy. What does one do on a garden tour?
Well, as I tell people to go on the garden tours, you really do have to love gardening to go. And typically what I have is one woman or a spouse will like gardening, and they're dragging someone along with them. So we also have to create some activities that are not garden specific. So when I take Cisco on a tour, or this other garden writer that I work with, her name is Marty Wingate, they would want to do 3 gardens in a day. And some of the people on the tour would too, but that's way too much. So we visit a distillery, we go to a winery. The South Africa thing, we're spending 4 days in Franschhoek and Stellenbosch. So there's going to be a good deal of wine on that tour. We're also spending 3 nights in a safari camp. So that's a good mix of wine and gardens. But the garden tour specifically will go to a big estate garden, like or a garden show like Chelsea Flower Show, or we'll go to somebody's private garden, typically in England, anywhere in the UK, and in Ireland and Australia as well. They have these garden scheme days where they open up small landowners will open up private gardens for charity. And it's great because you can actually see the owner of the place show their garden. And then the proceeds for that day will go to whatever charity they name. So next year, our Cotswolds tour with Marty Wingate, we're going to see the garden at Highclere Castle, which, if you don't know, that's the Downton Abbey site. So we tour the Downton Abbey house, and then we tour the garden. We're also going to Prince Charles Sustainable Garden. And unfortunately, if he's there, then you don't go. If he's not there, then you can go. He makes it clear he doesn't want to see anybody there. But that's kind of the things we do. And we do a lot of pub crawls in Japan. I took a group to Japan, which was a garden foliage tour with Cisco last year. And you see a lot of shrines, you see a lot of gardens. We did karaoke night one night. We do a lot of non-garden specific things because I have seen a lot of gardens and not much of it is stuck. I mean, I love a good garden, but I'm not a gardener. I never will be. So the question came up about what do you do on board when you're not in port? And that's a very good question. Typically what happens is, and I'll go back to the Rhone cruise that I did in 2017. Chef Terry Rotero is local here in Seattle, but he grew up in France. He owns 2 restaurants in Seattle. And Carrie, you have some of your wines in his restaurants, don't you? Mm-hmm. You do, okay. And so he wanted to do a cruise again, so he's back again to do this. And what he'll do is the winemakers and the chef will do talks on board. Everybody has a night or 2, depending on how much they want. They'll also have the opportunity to host a private winemaker dinner in the smaller dining room, which accommodates, say, 20 people. So there's wine discussion. There's also the ability, Terry said specifically told me that he doesn't want downtime. He wants to be busy the whole time. So what he did in 2017 was for lunches, when we were in port, he took small groups to Michelin-starred restaurants, including Paul Bocuse's restaurant there in Lyon. And so there's an additional cost for this, obviously, because a 3-star, 4-star, 3-star Michelin restaurant is going to be a little expensive for lunch. There's a big glass of wine in my ear there. I just noticed that backdrop. So there's also these cruise ships typically have what they call disco night. You have some. I'll back up a little bit, and that the cruise lines typically have an older clientele. And when I say older clientele, I'm now in my early 60s. I would say they design a lot of their itineraries for mid 70s and up. Our groups have always brought that average down by 20 years. And it's a wider range, I would say ranging from mid to late 40s on up to 70s. But they've always included what they call a disco night, and what they have is their DJ or their guy on the piano typically does a canned music night, and they push the furniture back against the wall and we dance. And to this date, every cruise we've done, with the exception of Mosul, because that was a smaller group, the one disco night turns into 3 or 4 disco nights because it is so much fun and people really kind of cut loose. So. But there's 3 meals a day on board, so you spend a lot of time eating, drinking, dancing when you're not in port. So
well, and
I hope that answers the question.
one of the things that we did in the Mosel, because of the Riesling specifically, was there were people would come up and ask questions about Riesling is so much variation, and the dry, the sweet, the different ripeness levels. So we'd pull into port, go out, people would buy a bunch of wine, come back, or one day we had gone to a winery and just happened to bring back on board a good mix of bottles to do a tasting. So there were, I don't know, half a dozen of us or there were about a half a dozen people who were interested. And while we were going to the next port, we went up on the deck and just had a Riesling tasting and asked questions and hung out and drank Riesling. And so there's a good, one of the things that I liked about it was, unlike Terry, I thought it was a good mix of, you have enough downtime to ask those questions and have those engaged conversations and those interesting, if you really want to know, there's time to delve into those sorts of things. And one of the good moments that I thought on the last trip was while we were underway sailing, which would be half a day, maybe sometimes a couple hours. But that's enough time to either mentally relax and read a book or to hang out with a winemaker and taste some wine and say, I would not be surprised if while we're going up through the Rhone, if we're talking about vineyard sites, and I mean, we looked at all the vineyard sites on the Mosel, and it was really a good mix of relaxation, but also engaging, and learned a lot.
And there was at least one Texas Hold'em tournament that I got involved in on this last cruise. I didn't fare well, but I don't know who suggested. I think I suggested it, and I regretted it.
For once, I was the responsible one in the group, just for the record. And
Right.
I was. Okay, so we got a whole bunch of questions, but you've got so many pictures there, Brad. Where's the
some of the pictures? A lot of these pictures are ones that I've taken. Some are from national tourist sites. The one behind me is Hvar, Croatia. That is the Dordogne. A lot of them I've taken over the last few years. Some are from friends, and some, again, I borrowed from, say, the South Africa Tourist Bureau. But they're a mix. Some are from the Japan tour that I took last fall. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of all over the map. It's from the Douro cruise in 2018. Yeah, too many places, too many. That one I stole from the French National Tourist site. So, before I forget, I was also going to say, and I don't know if I told you, is that I decided that what I want to do for next year's cruise is actually ship some of the local wine over, so we can do some comparison tastings with the local. And as I know that Larry Stone wanted to make sure that his wine was represented, and I think that's important for you and for Jeff to have your label in front of the people that are on this cruise. So. I see.
Paul, you can buy one, get the other one free. It's just twice the price. Does that make you feel better?
Yeah. I find as I talk, I don't have time to drink.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So what else do we have? June has a good question. Any places you visited that surprised you versus what your expectations were?
Yeah, a couple of places. Actually, a couple of places I went to that I never really developed into a tour. I went specifically with the idea of doing some research to plan a tour. Chile and Mendoza area of Argentina, I went to, and those areas surprised me both. Specifically, what surprised me most about Chile was the amount of poverty, the night and day difference between the upper and lower levels of the economy there. That was a big surprise. And I got back, and this was going to be a garden wine tour with Cisco again, and I made the mistake of mentioning some of the less attractive things I saw in Santiago, and Cisco declined to do the tour because he just didn't want to bring people there. So the other one, pleasantly, was Vietnam. When I went on a Mekong cruise and spent some time in Siem Reap and Angkor Wat, and then down into Saigon afterwards. And I loved everything about that trip. It was just fantastic. The cruise was good. The people were incredibly friendly. And that was a surprise to me. I just didn't expect the welcome. As an American in Vietnam, I didn't expect to see the welcome I got, but it was affordable. It was beautiful. The people were incredibly friendly. Unfortunately, my plans sort of stalled out there because to work with Uniworld on doing that program was a very expensive trip, and you can do it for a lot less on your own or with a lower level cruise product. So I'm still looking at that. I would like to do that. So, but those two places, I guess, probably come to mind more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that surprised me about Mendoza as well, was there is quite a disparity. Not just Mendoza, everywhere in Argentina.
Yeah.
There is a really big disparity of economic levels, but you know, the people are so wonderful and so welcoming. And there were so many people that invited me into their homes when it was a one bedroom apartment, and they had 3 generations living there, and they wanted to share everything that they had and wouldn't let me. I mean, it was against the hospitality to let me bring anything. I wasn't allowed to bring any wine. It was people were so wonderful in those settings. So, so even if you don't do a tour, I mean, you can't do a river cruise in Mendoza, but I highly recommend it as a tour.
I haven't given up. I still want to go back and revisit that. I really enjoyed my trip, and I've always been a big Carmenere fan, and so spending 5 days in Chile drinking a lot of Carmenere, that was heaven for me. So, and all the stuff I brought back is gone, long gone. So, yeah, I haven't stopped that. The Galapagos is another area that I want to go back to. I went down solo on a tour, and I was on an extreme budget when I was doing this fact-finding tour. I was sleeping in someone's back room, and to do it right, or to do it the way that I always look at Cisco as my low bar. If he's not going to like it, then I can't do it. To do it the right way, it is kind of an expensive proposition, only because the number of people that are allowed to visit the Galapagos every year is limited by law. They, even outboard motors, you can't bring another outboard motor into the Galapagos until one is retired. So they have a cap on pollution there.
So Adrish had asked a while ago about Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah. I have been to both places. I had a tour a couple of years ago, a garden wine tour to New South Wales and down into Tasmania. And it was beautiful from a natural perspective, and the wine and the gardens. It was a wonderful tour. Same with New Zealand. I would like to go back and revisit both places. I wish it wasn't so far to go, but really nice. 2 weeks in New Zealand, both islands, and I had been there with a buddy of mine. We took a quarter off from college, and we went to Australia and New Zealand. And when I got back, that was in 1980 or 79. When I got back, I wanted to move to Australia, and I found out they didn't want me because I number one, wasn't a professional, and number two, wasn't female. So they had no interest in having me come to Australia and live there. So
I didn't realize that was one of the pre-qualifications.
I think if you're a woman, they'll take you no matter what. I think there's still a kind of a shortage of women in Australia. So but at least that's the way it was back in the 80s. But I loved everything about Australia when I was there. So and this last tour was wonderful too, and it's affordable. Their dollar is tanking worse than ours, so it was a very affordable place to be.
I don't know, Andrish, if you heard Mom, she asked if that's why you got sent back as well. So,
very possibly.
So Andrish spent how long? 2.5 years in Melbourne? And
Oh,
So, Adrish, what were your favorite places in Oz?
I was just replying to Dan actually. He sent me a private message. I loved like Tasmania a lot. I loved the South Island in New Zealand. I didn't spend a lot of time in the North Island. I loved the Barossa Valley, obviously. McLaren Vale was actually surprisingly fun. And I really like Adelaide and that area in general. The Great Barrier Reef is spectacular in spite of everything.
No, you just go farther north. It's more fun farther north.
See, I never made it up there. And, you know, spent some time in like Uluru and kind of, you know, the outback, which was just incredible as well. So, yeah. And I made it out to Perth, but all I did there was watch a cricket match and then basically come back.
I will second Robin's comment that Margaret River was, for wine, fantastic. I will say that one of my most interesting car rental experiences anywhere in the world was in Perth, because I was trying to get down to the Margaret River and it's the middle of nowhere, so you have no public transportation. So I rented a car. And as I'm renting the car, they're like, okay, well, sign, you know, they always sign the things, walk around the car, do the damage. They're like, okay, and here's your insurance exception. We do not insure the top of the car, the bottom of the car, or any part of the vehicle if you're driving outside of a city at night. And I thought that just blew my mind. And I had to ask them why. And they said, because if you go off-roading, the roads are so bad that you'll rip up the bottom of the car. You'll go under, you can end up off the road and you get like the top of the car will get scraped up with all the trees. And at night, people tend to hit kangaroos all the time. So just plan your trip accordingly if you're going to go to Margaret River. Anywhere in Western Australia, I think. But the wine is worth it.
I did get hit by a kangaroo when we were driving in 80. And growing up from Sydney to Brisbane, a kangaroo jumped into the side of our car. We didn't hit him, he hit us. It ended badly for him no matter what, but that did cost us though. And as college students, we didn't have a lot of money out of pocket to pay for stuff like that. So, but yeah, I love Australia and New Zealand. The problem is it's just too big of a world and too many places to go. I had hoped to go to southern India this fall to do a little research on a garden tour that Cisco wants to do to Sri Lanka and Kerala. And the problem is that no one will book anything for me because they don't know what is going to be happening there. So I have a neighbor whose mother comes from that part of India who has talked to me about different places to go, but I'm kind of stalled out. That's been a big part of my life the last 6 months, is even for the Scotland garden tour for Cisco next year, is hotels don't respond to phones or emails. They just shut down and walked away because most of them are getting compensated in full, whether they work or not. There's no incentive for them to be there to take future bookings. It's been a very frustrating couple months to try to get any sort of plans booked for the future. I can understand why they're not there now, but how difficult is it to forward a phone line to handle future reservations? So it's, I think it's different with the way companies in the UK are working versus the way we have to work. I mean, as a small company myself, I'm not getting any money from the federal government. I just, there may be a way to do it. I haven't figured it out yet, but I just figured that whatever I do to survive is going to have to be up to me and not coming from the feds.
Well, I think that for the hospitality industry, or for hotels, I mean, one of the things that everybody's going to want to do when we get out of lockdown is go travel. So hopefully they start accepting bookings, or at least answering the phone sometime soon.
Well, they have. I've actually started hearing back from them now, saying the hotel just reopened. We're here to serve you, but which is great. So but it's just been kind of 2 months of doing nothing. So I almost feel guilty that I haven't been working. Working. I mean, I was moving 124 passengers from one cruise to another over the span of 12 months. So I guess I was doing something, but yeah. So, but hopefully there's better news coming.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Since in the chat we've got people saying how many bottles of wine they've brought back. What's the maximum number of bottles you've ever brought back from a cruise?
Oh man.
Or did you just drink them all on the boat?
I drink a lot on the boat. I mean, I try to bring back what's legal, you know, without paying the duty, because I hate lying to the guy when I come into the country. But at the same time, I don't want to have to pay $2 a bottle for a duty. So I don't bring back a whole lot. I bring back a couple of really good wines. Last September, I had a villa, 16-bedroom villa chartered for 2 weeks. So 2 different groups of 20 people each week. And so I did bring back some good Sangiovese that I'm still sitting on, but I had so much Sangiovese in Italy that I don't want to have any more for a long time. So these bottles will probably wait for me. That's pretty much all you get in Tuscany is Sangiovese if you're drinking red. So, but we had a great trip, and renting the villa in Tuscany is something I will revisit. It was one of the best tours I think I've ever had.
Well, I think it was funny after the Mosel, I was talking to some people and they said, oh man, all we drank was Riesling. I didn't want to drink any Riesling when I got home. And then there were a couple other people on the boat who were like, oh no, I mean, I came home and I went, I've had Riesling for the last 10 days, 2 weeks. I want more Riesling. Where's my Riesling? And we've been home, I don't know, about maybe a week. And I got a text message from some people that were also on the cruise from the East Coast who had walked by a wine shop and they were doing a wine tasting from one of the wineries we'd been to. So of course they're like, we have to go again. And then we have to share it. And it was so much fun. So some people, maybe Riesling's just more fun than Sangi. I don't know.
I can't get enough of Riesling, but Robin mentioned the Vernaccia, which was, we drank a lot of Vernaccia. The great thing was we had this entire villa and we had a chef coming in. When we weren't dining out, we had a chef coming in. And so it was my job to go to the local co-op and get wine for the dinners. And so we had some really interesting stuff, but we visited the Vernaccia, they don't call it a museum, but it's the House of Vernaccia in San Gimignano, and spent a lot of time there. We had more than enough wine to go around, but yeah, the Italian grapes. I mean, next time maybe we stay in a Barolo area or somewhere like that instead of the lighter red. They don't grow a lot of Italian varietals here in Washington, do they?
There's some.
A little bit.
There's a little bit. I did a winemaker dinner which was interesting, last night with Core Cellars, and from the Gorge, and he focuses on Alsatian and Friulian varietals, which was I didn't put it in the fridge soon enough, so I still have half a bottle of the Core White, which was lovely, and I will be having another glass of that tonight. But not really. I mean, they're not major varietals here. Sangiovese is growing, but I think the challenge with like Nebbiolo is
There's a little of that here, but
it doesn't grow. Nebbiolo does not grow well anywhere other than Piedmont, and just the sheer diversity of Italian varietals is so much greater than almost anywhere else in the world. And I feel like I feel like even in Italy, there's some grapes that we know about, but there's more genetic diversity and more varietal diversity in Italy than there is in France for sure. And so it's a really interesting, I don't know, do you guys want to do an Italian night? I have a friend who's an Italian. I have a friend who's an Italian wine specialist. We could do an Italian night.
Yes, let's do an Italian night.
Okay. So, oh wait, Micah also went to Northwestern. We got to do a little woot woot for all the Northwesterns because Paul's mom actually showed up today. Harv didn't come.
Becky's here.
But Becky's here. Adria's here. Mike is here. So you're not alone. I'm here.
And he's got his Navy shirt on, so
Yeah.
getting Navy people.
So no, I mean Italy's great, but we'll have to do Haley, my friend Haley knows so much more than I do about wines from Italy in general, and specifically I am much more of a Piemontese specialist, having spent my time in Piedmont. But I'm sure she'd love to come talk to us specifically about Italy. So, and then Brad, you'll have to organize a tour to Italy. So in a couple of years, we'll do an Italian wine tour.
I'm up for that. Yeah, I mean, I love Italy. Anytime I can go back there, I'm all for it.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Do they take ships? Is it the Po River in Torino?
I don't know. Do they? I mean, I know they do cruises, but do they do cruises like around the boot, or do they do?
Oh yeah, there are quite a few cruises that focus on Italy. They go all the way around and spend time on the Adriatic side, as well as Rome and even farther up. There's one river cruise that they operate on the Po River, which is not a real attractive river. It's a lot of industry, and unfortunately, with that cruise, they spend most of their time in the Venice Lagoon, and so it's kind of a Venice Po River combination, and it's kind of a weird hybrid. You probably heard 2 years ago there was one of Uniworld ships that got crushed by a big ocean-going ship that was coming into port in Venice, and they repaired it and it's floating again, and nobody was hurt seriously in that accident, but that cruise spends time in the Venice Lagoon, and then everybody has to get off the ship because of Italian maritime regulation. The ship has to sail empty to the mouth of the Po, where all the passengers get back on. And so, plus, in addition to the industry on the Po River, they have a big mosquito problem there. So, it's not been something I've pursued. So, as much as I would like the area, but getting a small ocean-going cruise, and I'm actually talking to a Scenic Cruise Lines, is an Australian-based cruise line that does a lot of European river cruises as well. And I've looked at them off and on and asked for proposals for some of the projects I want to do. But they have come up with now 200 passenger boats that are going to be cruising the Adriatic and the Italian coast. So I'm possibly looking into doing one of these 150 passenger ships that will do nothing but the Italian coast. And it's all inclusive. And typically what you have with the all inclusive cruises is that they want you off the ship, as opposed to the cruise lines that have you on board and charging you for alcohol, because it's a big revenue producer. The more drinks they can sell, the more money the cruise line makes. So when they include the alcohol, the idea is they want you off the ship, so you're not consuming all the free booze that you've already paid for. So I will look into that, and if it makes sense, doing a coastal Italian cruise could be a lot of fun if you're in port most of the time. I think that would be a fun project.
So Nugget,
Alarm.
telling us that it is 6 o'clock. And he's usually pretty good, but that must be somebody at the door. So anyway, we are at about our hour, and again, I don't know how much time you guys have. Do we have any more questions for Brad? Okay, we will see you all in Provence and the Rhone up into Burgundy. I think that would actually be a wonderful thing to do since we've talked about how this is the Wednesday Wine Club. We should all go on a trip together. That'd be fun. And then we don't have to drive from one part of Minnesota to the other to go see each other. Excellent idea. I love it. So next week, we're continuing the travels. We're going to Australia, specifically for fishing. Sally is going to talk to us about, she works to import and distribute seafood around at least the Pacific Northwest. And so we're going to talk about where all of our fish comes from. It's going to be super fun. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Brad, for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
And we'll see you all next week.